Okay, welcome back to the session 21. In this session, I will, as promised in the last session, I will talk about the edification of the Chinese illiterate. So, how did they do that? Well, not necessarily intentionally, but it worked out that way that the drama or theater became a very powerful edification of the core Chinese civilization values among the Chinese illiterate. Um, the theater or stage drama developed in China, ancient China, much later compared to the other art disciplines such as the calligraphies or ink brush paintings. The uh, Actually, the reason the Chinese theater or stage drama actually developed at a much, uh, faster pace and much bigger scale was actually due to a very interesting historical fact that when the Mongolians occupied China, uh, at the beginning, they did not, of course, they didn't care for the Chinese system of this three-level court official credential exam. So they totally just, put it aside, abandon the system. So after so many years, so many centuries, the Chinese intellectuals were used to, and that was the only way they could, one, find their quote unquote job, and two, they could actually contribute, and that was basically their lifestyle, the way of their living, and that was all, basically seized all of a sudden after the Mongolians occupied China. Of course, the Mongolians have their own perspective, from their own angle of observations. If a person can prove to be a great soldier, then that's of value. But if you cannot be a good soldier, either you're too weak, you don't have muscles, or basically you don't look like much to put you in the army, then you're not worthy of anything, right? A horse would be better than you. So, uh, in the Mongolian occupied territory, of course, that contained not just Chinese, they had the Arabs as well. And Arabs apparently were much better soldiers than the Chinese, because the Chinese did not believe in violence and did not believe in war unless they have to absolutely do it to protect themselves. So, of course, the Chinese are not cut out to be soldiers, at least not, they were not, back then. So, in the Mongolian Empire, the first class citizen, of course, was the Mongolians, and the second class citizen were the Arabs. And the third class, this is getting interesting, the third class was the Chinese, the Han Chinese, from north of China. And in north of China, the Han Chinese, racially, the bloodline already messed up with a bunch of different non-Han races or ethnic groups, because in the 3,200 years of history in Beijing, only less than 300, after 200 some years, or the empire ruled by the Han ethnic group. All the other time, they were not the Han ruled empires. Okay, so in the north, of course, it's not a so pure bloodline Han Chinese, but nevertheless, they were a bit stronger than the Chinese, the Han Chinese in South China. So the northern Chinese were classified as the third class citizen in the Mongolian Empire, and the Chinese in the south, I'm sorry, they were on the bottom. They were the fourth class citizens in the Mongolian Empire, right? So when you are at the bottom of the society, whereas for generations you're used to being a Chinese elite, of a certain social standing, of course, how do you feel about that? You have a lot of things bottled in because you wouldn't dare to express them openly, because then for Mongolian to cut the head of a Chinese off, that's just easy. You know, any Mongolian can do that. So you don't, openly protest or complain about it. And then in the meantime, with all that, you know, readings, studies, you have nowhere to go. You no longer have the opportunity to take the exams to become a court official. So what do? With all that, things you don't dare to complain, but you bottle in, you start writing about it. And then when you write poetry, yes, it does, help you, but you want to express a little more and share a little more. Still, you imply, you don't explicitly like express. So they started to do this drama. That they became the playwrights of the Chinese stage play. Okay, so before that, did they have something? Yes, that was basically just folk. I guess you call it folk arts or whatever. For the illiterate, for the commoners, they never really cared much about it until this time. Okay, they hang out. They couldn't do much, so they do this, which of course enriched the Chinese literature in the scope of drama. So the playwrights, when they did all this script, it became so beautiful in the classical literature. And of course, the Chinese elites, they had absolutely no better things to do. So that Chinese play or drama or theater became by and for the former Chinese elites before the Mongolians occupied China, and became very popular. And so what was eventually became the Northern drama, which basically was popular among the north part of China. It was more about changing the tones, basically the melodies, a lot of that. People in the north did not care that much about the beautiful literature of the script wrote, and it was more about it, and in the north, there are more cultural varieties, between different locations, the locals, and so you would see a lot of differences. But this was actually regulated from day one. Among the first Chinese government agencies in the first royal court in China, thousands of years ago, they did not like all the different kind of local tones. Okay, so they wanted to unify the music, and that was the sheer function of the government agency created just for that, because Confucianists, they believe some tones are more representing the weak willpower than others. And some are, basically they criticize. So they want to, uniform the music to the same style. But of course, this all, fell apart when the Mongolian came. So there was this North style stage drama. Of course, that's kind of like what today we would call opera, but it's not at a full scale opera. But basically the music comes with the performance. And you actually dance a little bit too. But then in the South, it's totally different from the North. In the South, they stay with the same format, music-wise, and basically all they do is keep changing the contents. So the playwright basically just, all they do is, change that. And they didn't even need, music composers, because all the Chinese, I guess, certain formats of poetry, they all came with the certain format and certain melodies. Okay, so if you fill up with the words, you can sing. If you indicate what format this is, right? So in the South, this became so popular. Sometimes you would have like several hundred Chinese former elites, singing the, I guess, the entire, uh, you know, drama thing, the selected pieces together, like a, pop music today. So with all that, of course, it just evolves again and again. And then throughout the nation, of course, eventually the Mongolians adopted the system of three-level exams, and so the Han eventually got their chance to serve in the Mongolian court. But still, the Chinese theater or state drama started to evolve and eventually revolutionized. And it became very, very popular throughout the nation. So in those stories told in the Chinese theater, there was obviously always a very, very clear moral value, right from wrong. So the characters created always represent the right and the wrong. In fact, it is kind of unique in the Chinese stage drama. They don't necessarily wear any mask, but they do the makeup. And I believe in the Peking opera, which was developed way later in Manchurian Empire, but in the Peking opera, there are about 300 very particular ways to do the makeup. So the audience could tell, is this a bad guy or good guy? So the moral value evidently very clear, because you always see the bad guy against the good guy in any stage play, right? One thing different from the European drama, though, is in the early history of European drama, of course, the nobility started the theater thing. They were bored, so they started to practice themselves to play something. But it was all tragedy. In European or early theater history, the commoners, the poor people, they already experienced too much tragedy every day. They don't need that to appreciate. So they prefer to see the comedy. So there was the I guess where they draw the line. The nobilities in Europe, they were bored, so they wanted to see, excuse me, the bittersweetness, the tragedy, whereas the commoner on the street, what they they want to have the big laugh, okay, to forget the daily tragedy they live in. But in China, it's all tragedy, okay. But the thing is, there's no such thing as the genre to divide the tragedy from strategy, because in the overall tragedy, you always see a little, funny character coming in, out, flash in, flash out, and drop a few, lines there to make it very funny. Okay, so it's the comedy element embedded into the tragedy story. And again, in the Chinese theater, you will see the characters. Actually, you can tell the second they appear on the stage, you can tell this is the guy come to basically to deliver the punch, to make people laugh, just kind of change the atmosphere momentarily a little bit. When it gets really too sad, you need to adjust, and that's when and where there's little characters, funny characters that came out, and basically leave a few joke line, kind of poke you, make you laugh. And that's Chinese I guess theater, right? And this works so well. So a lot of Chinese elite back then, they know a lot of all these stories from this stage drama, and they basically apply that in their daily life. They would say so and so is actually just acting like so and so in whatever the Chinese theater, that character. They use that in daily life all the time. So you can see the edification worked so well, among the Chinese illiterate in the ancient China. Now, why do I keep saying I am a Chinaman? I'm not a Chinese. It's not the legal sense. Of course, I'm American Chinese, but here's the thing. The founding father of the Red Republic single-handedly disconnected the contemporary China from the ancient China in the sense of what we repeated again and again. China is really the center of a civilization for edification and education, right? So the Chinese elite existed, represented this China, right? But from arts to political system to legal system, the Red King himself basically just wiped out the entire culture of the Chinese elite, which I thought was the uniquely representing the old China. But the Red King basically just wiped the whole thing out. Reduced to what? Once again, there's nothing wrong with how the farmers in China enjoy their life. They need their own arts. They don't care about the arts that's appreciated by quote unquote high art. They don't care, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because basically, if you're a big country by population, you gotta have all different kinds of streams of this and that, right? To coexist at the same time. But when you reduce the whole civilization, the whole culture to the one single farmer culture, what do you think China is today, right? The way they think, the way they see things, the way they talk, the way they act. Back in the Cultural Revolution, this word in English, somebody translated. A lot of English people back then lived in China. They became communists themselves, and they knew the Chinese communist concept, so they translated. What was promoted as a banner back then? You saw them everywhere in China, in the Red China. Says workers, soldiers, and the peasants. They didn't use the word farmer. They used the peasants. I remember my English teacher, from Britain, came to Shanghai, and he told us, he said, peasant? That's an insult of human being. How could you guys use that word? But hey, that was the word, right? So imagine the whole country, the Chinese intellectuals were sent to get the re-education for the values of the peasants. And then, we're talking about decades after decades. It goes on. And then as far as the arts, trace back to late 1930s, I guess the founding father of the Red Republic back then was not the head of the ruling party, already made it a party line. The arts must serve the people, okay, for the people. But by that word people, the Red King meant the peasants, quote unquote peasants. So basically, the contemporary Chinese arts basically all reduced to that. So as a Chinaman, I wanted to preserve the beauty of the classical Chinese, which a lot of contemporary Chinese today do not understand, let alone appreciate, right? So I'm working on my project of a opera, Western opera, not the Peking opera, but all in Chinese. This is the only project I'm working on is in Chinese. All the others are in English. And the reason for that is I want to preserve the beauty of the classical Chinese. So the characters will, in this play script that I'm working on, they would all use the language of the classical Chinese. except for one was from the Chinese elite, the other was from the commoners, in comparison. On my last visit to Beijing, I got together with some of my friends, and one of them was the guest conductor of the number one Chinese opera house, and the other friend was the first violin uh, in that opera house. And so I kind of tossed my concept of this project with them and collect some feedback. And this is what I found out, okay, according to my friends. Uh, the Chinese opera houses, and other, I guess, art organization, they are well funded by the Chinese government today. I'm talking about today. And a lot of them do 3 or 4 productions at the same time. Uh, you know, or let's say, let me rephrase it, not same time. Every year they would have 3 to 4 productions. That means a lot of artistic creation, and then the rehearsal, and then they go around the country and show the opera in the countryside in the remote places. I don't know what was the feedback they got because they didn't tell me, but they did this. But it sounds good, right? But a lot of them, if not all of them, they were just a pure political propaganda. And funny part, well, I call it funny because I'm American, but in America, or I guess to a degree in Europe too, you don't always get the fun to start a new, production of an entirely new, I guess, program, right? So lots of time your production is limited to what people call the repertoire, meaning basically you collect certain very good ones, and you run them, right, in your performance seasons. They don't do that in China. They just basically come out, roll out with a new one, and go around and basically the troop, do the performance um, around the country for several months, and boom, that thing's done. They don't have any repertoire per se. Okay, so every year they're funded with the new productions of the new programs all the time. So I'm like, wait, don't they want other opera houses out there to do the production of the program they created? No. Ah, okay. And then if they don't have the repertoire, how their artists or actors, actresses, artists, how do they, I guess, learn, pass on from one generation to another, about all this, I guess, programs, right? Because you have certain characters. How do you interpret this and that? Nope, don't worry about it. We don't do that. Okay, we're talking about this conductor, the guest conductor himself. He was trained by the British in the Royal Academy, and he started his career in Australia. So you think he actually think the same way as those great communists? I'm not sure about that, but I don't know if he was mocking, but basically this is what he shared with me. So anyway, I know all this, what I'm telling you is I know I will not get a chance to have my, I guess, opera play script, being produced by any opera house in China. And it's not about money because they do have money to fund for the productions. But it just like, I don't have that taste. You have to reflect the good, communist peasants in certain taste, in certain style, and I ain't got that. My being a Chinaman, it's all about being a Chinaman. So that will never work together. So I don't even have a slight, the thin hope about, oh, in China one day they might do it. Yeah, I just do it, basically, and put it aside. Maybe 5,000 years later, when there is no China, left, then people say, wait, there's something. Does that suggest China? Hopefully, that's my hope. Okay, you might say I'm wasting my time. Yeah, maybe. Hey, remember, if you're a Taoist, what do you think is really important that you want to do before you kick the bucket? For me, it's not chasing after money or fame or anything. I just want to do what I want to do. The whole point about being in here, enjoy the freedom, is I get to do what I want to do, which I could not say the same back when I was in the other country, right? So anyway, that wraps up this session for today. I'll see you until the next one. Ciao.